Hey team, it's John, and I'd like to have a little bit more discussion on the hitch that I proposed here on the left, that I suggested the name of the Saddle Hunter's Hitch. And I'd like to start really actually by quoting Ashley's Book of Knots. On page 317, it describes number 1919, the toggled bight, which is employed in hoisting sail preparatory to bending. A spill line or trip line is attached to the toggle. And adjacent to 1919 is 1920, where it describes the toggled bight is more secure if extra turns are added. I think this is a good place to start, because here on the right is number 1919, the toggled bight. We fold a bight around the member and the toggle is placed through. Now in the case of a carabiner, it's important to orient it on the right side where the ropes are trying to pull it apart. Should I put the biner in from the other way, it's insecure. That biner can pop through, and obviously we've got an obvious failure mode there. And it's important to note that when the hitch is applied, the bight goes around the two strands, and it creates on each side in cross section two crossing points, a crossing point here, and the same on both sides, a total of 4 crossing points. I did tie this hitch accidentally before I saw it in the Book of Knots as I was doing my experimentation, and settled on this variant. We could call this a variant of the toggled bight, in the sense that the Saddle Hunter's Hitch I proposed is very similar. It's just that instead of the bight being spread apart, it's put inside the two strands, then spread apart, and then locked. And in that regard, it has 3 crossing points per side, 1 down the bottom and 2 here. 2 crossing points form an elbow, if I have my terminology correct. And that just gives me a little bit of extra resistance that I needed for the application that I was after. But I need to discuss a couple more details, because I know we're talking about, what should we call this? What's the right name for it? But I want to make sure we're anticipating its variants, which are different. So this is safe and secure for the applications that I'm planning, and I know we'll do some more testing on it. But you'll recall that one of the properties is it takes load on either strand. Well, let's flip back to 1919 and let's see how it turns into 1920. According to the Book of Knots, we turn this into 1920 by taking those 2 strands and folding them around both strands again, and then applying the toggle. So this is the more secure version of the toggled bight. And we get more crossing points and more binding, okay, and as well as a wrap, a full turn around the rope. There would be other ways to do this. These aren't in the Book of Knots. I've tied them and experimented with them, but starting with the toggled bight, instead of spreading the strands going around both, they could simply go around each strand like that. That might be considered a variant of the toggled bight. I went from 2 crossing points on a side to 4 crossing points on a side, or 2 elbows on a side. And I just wanted that as background as we explore the variants with the Saddle Hunter's Hitch. What I noticed is, as we start to apply these techniques for additional binding, the toggle itself starts to, so that's the generic variant. But if we wrap these around further, I started to notice that the toggle itself will accept the load. And in fact, what I've just created is a more secure version of the Saddle Hunter's Hitch, in the same way that 1919 was transformed into 1920. I took the Saddle Hunter's Hitch and transformed it into its more secure variant. So I passed the bight through, spread it apart. I'm ready to apply the toggle, but no, I take those two strands, I spread them apart, and go around both strands, then apply the toggle. And what I've noticed in my testing is that not only can both strands take a load, but the toggle can take a load. Believe it or not, if I put my body weight right here on this beaner, the toggle, even without a load on these strands, it'll actually hold my weight without slipping. Now, I am not saying that it's a life safety knot, but I am saying there can be value in the fact that the toggle can take a load. Okay, what value? Well, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and that's really what drove me to this. What I've been trying to work on is a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage system with minimal gear. And in tying the Saddle Hunter's hitch with the more secure variant and applying the toggle, and what I've got a little further down here, and I'm gonna zoom out, I'm ready to take a load on both strands. This strand goes down around a beaner attached to some weight on the floor, comes back up the other side, and goes through. This is a Blake's hitch. So what's about to happen here, if I take slack out of this Blake's hitch, I'm starting to pull weight up off the floor. So these strands are both loaded. But what I can do now is I can, by clipping the rope through, I now have a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage system, which is automatically tending. So when I put force, give you a little better vantage point. Can you see what's happening? This is automatically tending, and I've got a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage system. With one hand, I'm raising 50 pounds or so. So that's kind of neat, and I would definitely want to, or need to, have a way to distinguish this variant from the generic variant. Okay, I'll tie them one more time. So this is the generic variant. And to transform it into the more secure variant, I pass these around 180 degrees. A toggle will be applied in the other direction. That's the more secure variant, and it'll take a load on the toggle. And of course, if these lines are loaded, the toggle's even more secure. It will take even more load. I've tried different options for increasing resistance. As I showed you with 1919, we could just spin these lines in this fashion. We do that multiple times if we want, but I find that to be inferior. I mean, it's very symmetrical, but there's a lot of very tight binding on the members. I prefer to add resistance in the same way that 1920 does to 1919, and that is to simply rotate the strands around both strands. Okay, and then there's one other important variant to discuss, and that is this one. So if I form the Saddle Hunter's hitch and I'm ready to apply the toggle, and let's say I wanted to avoid, I said there's a little bit of a bending force on the toggle. What if I wanted to eliminate that? So I experimented a little and realized if I take one of these bites and pass it through the other, I have not in any way reduced the friction or security of the hitch. I've only added a little bit of resistance. And by snugging that up and applying a toggle like this, well, now my toggle has no forces no bending force whatsoever. And in fact, and this is the cool part, I said early on I wasn't trying to create a quick release hitch. However, it turns out that nub of a bite there is so, grab my other rope here, is so well positioned, I can turn this into a quick release hitch. And I can do that with a removable toggle similar to a fiddlestick, or I can take a bite of rope, I can pass it through there, and now when I apply load, that's being squeezed and it just doesn't go anywhere, and it's lockable, right? I can put, so what I have here, what I've created out of Saddle Hunter's hitch using a separate rope as the trigger line is a releasable, remotely releasable hitch, which is very secure and takes load on both sides. So I could rappel down on one or both sides of this rope, in theory, right? I haven't tested all this yet. And before doing so, I could remove the lock if it was employed at all. And this end of the rope does nothing. But if I try to pull on this while there's a load, as this approaches the bite, the resistance increases. That's a nice feature. And once I'm down, I can remove my release line. And then I tested this. It's a little easier actually on a tree when it's tied in the vertical direction, but I release it by tugging on either line in an alternating fashion. That one came out a little easier than some of my earlier tests. It's tied again. That's all the strength I can muster with two arms. And when I remove tension, I can remove the release line, and then it goes. So some pretty neat variants, and I'm just trying to plan ahead if we give any of these things a name, how we can cover all of those. How can we take it from what I had proposed as the Saddle Hunter's hitch to the more secure variant, or this variant, and applying the toggle as either a solid member or potentially a rope or a bite of rope in this regard. So those are some of my tricks. I look forward to your comments, and of course I just want to make sure that we're planning ahead in terms of any nomenclature, any names that we might give this. But in one way, it's really all just some extra sauce on top of number 1919 in the book. Thanks, and I look forward to the comments.